Hello, class, and welcome to our review of causal arguments in relation to the essays and argument strategies we've been discussing throughout the semester. Um, Essay number one, we looked at the effects of raising animals for food on the environment. Uh, Essay two, we looked at the effects of stereotypes on identity and society and culture as a whole. So for essay three, we're also going to continue with the idea of focusing on effects and causes as well, specifically, right, when looking at the notion of privacy and surveillance. Um, in your response for essay one to Freston's argument, uh, right? In light of Freston's argument, why is America not a nation of vegetarians? A lot of you looked at the causes, the reasons why people would choose to eat meat, uh, but less of it, right? As Freston suggests, uh, logical consumption of animals and animal products um, in ways that does not hurt the environment. Um, so your rhetorical analysis, right, of Freston focused on the effects of eating meat on the environment, and your response looked at more of the causes. If you said people should continue to eat meat but less of it, or what would cause people to eat no meat if you chose to write the essay from a vegetarian or vegan standpoint, things like animal cruelty and health reasons. So for essay two, as we know, what causes people to stereotype are logical fallacies, fallacious arguments like hasty generalizations, double standards, either or false cause reasoning, dogmatism, right? These are all fallacies that lead people to stereotype, and then we examine the effects of stereotyping um, on identity and culture and society, just like we looked at the effects of eating meat on and raising animals for food on our culture and society for essay one. So for essay three, the big focus is on privacy and surveillance, right? And I think we can all agree that the internet has changed the meaning of privacy. And our section on causal arguments uh, specifically focused on different kinds of causes. And I think that when you think about surveillance and privacy, right, the whole point of surveillance is to keep our society safer. But at what point is it violating our privacy? And if it is violating our privacy, what causes that to be okay? If it is okay, right? Just think about the airport scanners, right? Uh, After 9/11, there was all sorts of profiling at the airport, right? And searches that many felt violated our rights to privacy. Now, even though the point of that surveillance was to prevent um, terrorism on airplanes, at what point, right, do the effects outweigh privacy and surveillance, right? At what point do the effects, right, outweigh our safety and violate our privacy? And again, we're going to read multiple essays on surveillance, and for essay number three, you can pick any kind of surveillance, whether it's audio, visual, email, phone conversations, text messages, social media, internet website surveillance, doxing, pretty much any kind of surveillance. And the question to focus on is that surveillance benefiting our society, or is it having a negative effect on our society and culture? Are there any unintended consequences or unforeseen consequences? Because as we know, surveillance is supposed to make us safer, but when it violates our privacy, is that an unintended consequence? Or is that an intended consequence? Is it meant to violate our privacy? So Many of you might start with the Patriot Act. If you're not familiar with it, right? Um, there's a whole section in the Opposing Viewpoints database on the Patriot Act. And before 9/11, the government would have to get a legal warrant to be able to monitor your phone calls and things of that nature. However, now the Patriot Act, after 9/11, has made it easier for the government to get access to lots of information that previously was considered a violation of privacy. So as you're looking at the topics and issues for this essay, keep in mind the book's advice, right? That you can kind of look at cause and effect in three different ways. You could state a cause and then look at the effects. You could state an effect and then trace back the causes, right? On page 242, they break down the three major categories. Or it's an argument, right, that moves through a series of causes. A causes B, which leads to C, and perhaps D. And many of us may find ourselves writing from a causal chain perspective, that one thing leads to the next. Make sure you have factual evidence, make sure you have logos, because what you want to avoid is any sort of slippery slope reasoning. But the causal chain is an effective way, right, to examine the results and the effects, right? A causal chain is an ordered sequence of events in which any one event in the chain may cause the next. So the terms the book focuses on specifically, and I asked you to consider while reading, listed on page 251. I've pulled up each of them here. First, we have, when looking at the causal arguments, you want to first determine the sufficient cause. The book says it's enough for something to occur on its own. Enough for something to occur on its own. And all these definitions that I reference are on page 251. Everything's an argument with readings, right? Rothman defines it is not, what does he say? A complete causal mechanism that inevitably produces disease, okay, from a health standpoint. So a sufficient cause is not a single factor, but a minimum set of factors and circumstances that produce a disease. So from a medical standpoint, when you Google it, more specifically, right, it relates to enough for something to occur on its own. There's sufficient, there's enough of something to determine, right, that an effect will be produced, right? So when you examine the sufficient cause, right, that's a very important step when determining causation, right? And the second thing to consider, as we look down here, necessary cause is the event without which the consequences cannot occur. Sufficient cause, right? Any event which is always followed by the consequence, right? So, and there is this relationship existing. So first off, right, we have the sufficient cause. Now we look at the necessary cause, right? For example, HIV exposure is necessary for AIDS to occur. So again, back to necessary, the event without which the consequences cannot occur. So it has to happen. And the sufficient cause is any event that's always followed by the consequence. So I really think the book does a nice job of breaking them down. And sufficient cause is enough for something to occur on its own, right? Necessary cause is required for something to occur. Now, a precipitating cause, as the book determines it, right, it brings on a change, right? So a single precipitating event may turn a later condition into the manifest form of the disorder. So when you think of it, it's what brings on a change, right? What leads, again, these all lead to effects. So the necessary cause is necessary to have the effect. The precipitating, right, it brings on the effect. The sufficient cause, right, is that there's enough for it to occur. Now, the proximate cause, as the book determines, right, is indirect, immediately present or visible cause of action. So it's the immediate cause, right? Proximate means close to, right? Proximate means legal cause, or the one the law requires the primary cause of the injury. Is an event sufficiently related to an injury that the court deems the event to be the cause? In an event sufficiently relates, right? There are two types of cause in fact and proximate cause. So it's immediately present, right? The remote cause, unlike the proximate cause, is indirect or underlying, right? One that is removed or separate from the proximate cause. But yet again, it still could be leading to an effect. And last but not least is the reciprocal cause, right? Refers to the exact situation where two events influence each other simultaneously, right? One factor leads to a second, which reinforces the first, creating a cycle, is what the book says. One factor leads to a second, which reinforces the first, creating a cycle. So as you're beginning to think about your causal analysis, when you're writing your essays, you want to keep all of these different kinds of causes in mind so that your specific facts and specific details can be analyzed in such a way that the relationship can be explained through logical and effective argument. Much like the essays that we have read and will continue to read this semester that examine causal arguments also present the necessary and the specific types of causes that lead to the argument. So hopefully this is helpful, as causal analysis is an important argumentative strategy and one that I think will be effective specifically for our essay with regards to privacy and surveillance. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching and listening.